What's going on, everybody? This is Al from PlaybookGamer.com, and this video is the first of many videos that will be part of a series in what I like to call the NCAA Football 06 Recruiting Guide. I'm going to cover every facet of recruiting that I can think of, and however many videos it takes to do so, that's what we will do. Now, even though I'm using NCAA 06 as my base, you can use a lot of this information in some other games, particularly from 06 through 11. Dynasty mode was very similar with those games. 05 as well, and the older you get, it may get a little bit different compared to what you may see in these videos. But again, just remember, you can use quite a bit of this stuff in your NCAA football game of choice, at least for the PS2/Xbox games. Now, the last thing I want to talk about before we get into this video is make sure you use the timestamps. That way you can go back and forth through every spot on the videos you want pretty quickly. It's just a good way to navigate the videos because there's going to be a lot to cover. So make sure you take advantage of them. So let's jump right into this video. What we're going to cover today is the preseason recruiting. This is the part of recruiting up until your first game of the season. So let's jump right into it. The first thing we want to do is go to the main menu. Now, this is the main menu, and the first thing we're going to do is go to game modes. Game modes is going to give us all the modes this game has, and for this particular series, we're going to be going into Dynasty mode. Dynasty mode is where you take a team and you run as many seasons as you want to with them. You recruit new players, all that good stuff. So let's select Dynasty mode, and we're going to select New. Now, the Dynasty Setup screen gives us a lot of options. Let's just go through a lot of these very quickly. At the very top, you have the team that you are going to pick, along with this is the team right here. You also have, you can add a 1AA school or create a school if you need to. We have the previous record for that school. We have the current conference for that school. You can turn off or on coach contracts. That's if you just don't want to care to get fired or you want to move up the ladder of the coaching ladder, that type of thing. You can do that as well. You also have over here the amount of teams you want to run in a single dynasty. Right now it's set to 1, but if I hit R1, I can add 2 all the way up to 12. If I go back to L1, it goes up to 12. But for this particular series, I'm just going to take one team and kind of go through the whole thing. Here at the very bottom, we got a few options. This is, you press X to continue. That will begin your actual dynasty. You also have edit coach. This lets you edit your coach. And right here, it's the help screen. Now, we can hit edit coach, hit circle, and it just gives you a bunch of options to make your coach look a certain way. This has nothing to do with recruiting, so I'm not going to go over any of that. Now, you can also hold down the square button. Now, as you can tell, I'm using PlayStation 2 buttons here, but for those of you who run on an Xbox, you should be able to follow along with no issues. But you got to hold down square to bring up your help menu, and all this is, it just shows you all the options you have on this particular page. Now, the team I'm going to select for this dynasty is the Pittsburgh Panthers. The Pittsburgh Panthers, you notice here, program and academic prestige. It goes back and forth. Program prestige is a star rating from 1 to 6. All that means is the higher the star rating, the better the prestige is for that program as a whole, and the same with the academics. The more games you win, the better chance you'll get another star added onto it, the better recruits you can get, all that good stuff. So that was the last thing I wanted to point out there. So let's go ahead and hit continue, and let's begin our dynasty. This is the main menu for Dynasty mode. Now, this is a recruiting guide, not a Dynasty mode guide. So I'm not going to cover every single little aspect of Dynasty mode unless it affects recruiting. Now, you would think that as soon as I jump into a Dynasty, the first thing I'm going to do is go right into in-season recruiting. But no, what I like to do is go to coach options. So let's select that. And let's go right into strategy. This screen gives you a lot of good info about how you want to go about doing things schematically on the field with your coach. Now, this screen has a few different things to look at. Of course, at the very top, it's got the coach profile picture, the coach name. Of course, I didn't even change it at the beginning of the video. It's got the team. It's got his career record, which will change over time. It's got a couple different screens to look at within coach strategy, which we will go over here in a minute. And over here on the left, it's got different coaches that you can look at throughout the dynasty itself. So for example, I can hit R1 and it goes through all these other coaches. I can actually change this around. This is useful if you are running multiple teams at the same time. We are not doing that. So we're going to go back to our coach. And here we have playbook. All playbook is for simulation purposes. I never sim my games. I always control my playbook. I create my own. And I suggest you do the same. But if you simulate games, this is kind of important to you. But this doesn't affect recruiting. Offensive type does. Let's talk about the first important aspect of the screen. Offensive type, all that is, it is telling the game what offense you like to run and how many minimum amount of players you need for each offensive position. For example, this is the balanced offense. This could mean a little bit of everything. But balance is going to be like I need a minimum of 5 receivers at all time, 3 tight ends, whatever it is. Now, there are several offensive types. You got balance. That's most people use this for pro style purposes, or if you're going to run a little mix of everything. Flex bone, that's triple option type stuff. West Coast, that's more pro style. That's geared around short passing. Option run, that's very option oriented. And you have spread offense for those of you who like to go 3 and 4 wide. Now, for this dynasty, I'm just going to do balance. Now, I'm going to do a separate video on offensive types alone, how to recruit to each one, but that's for another day. What I want you to focus on here is that the importance of selecting this, and we're going to look at that here in a little bit, how important this really is. Let's talk about base defenses. No different than the offensive side of things. You got different types of defenses. For this dynasty, I'm going to go with a 4-3, and all that means is 4 defensive linemen and 3 linebackers as my base. That really tells you the minimum requirement for defense as well. And it also gives you the first formation on your play call screen. So if my base defense is going to be 4-3, the very first formation that's going to pop up every time is the 4-3. Now you have different defenses: 4-3, 4-4, 3-4, 3-3-5 stack, and 4-2-5. Now I'm going to cover every single one of these in a separate video as well. Everything below that is all simulation purposes. We are not going to talk about any of this since I don't simulate games, and it has nothing to do with recruiting. So the next thing we want to talk about is strategy. So let's select R2. This is the second screen of Coach Strategy. It's the CPU assistants. You got 2 options. You got recruiting assistants and discipline assistants. Let's talk about recruiting. You can toggle this on or off. If you toggle it off, that means you have 100% control over your recruiting points, in season, off season, anywhere and everywhere. If you left this on, that means you are telling the game, hey, I got some spare points. Can you put this on somebody? I don't like to use it. Again, I like to have full control over my recruiting. So we're going to turn that off. I'm going to just hit the right directional button or left, either way. It says if set to off, the CPU will not give any assistance with recruiting. I'm going to select OK. The same with discipline. Sometimes players get in trouble and you got some points to spare, or you didn't discipline them at all. The CPU will handle that for you. Again, I like to have full control over this, so I'm going to turn this off as well. And that is it for coaching strategy. So let's back out and let's look at preseason options. This is my next stop at the very top. Custom schedules is your next thing up. This kind of affects recruiting. Now, this is where you create your own custom schedule. You see a lot of non-conference games right here, and you notice right here this little lock logo. All that means that is a conference game. You can't change those, so that is under lock and key. Now, what I want to point out here actually affects recruiting, and that is, if you notice, the weeks go 1 through 15. Normally, from like week 7 through week 15 is where a lot of in-season recruits will come in to visit your school. That means it may be in your best interest to kind of look and see if you got some weak home games you can schedule. That way you can hopefully win that game. And we're going to cover that in the next video, in the in-season recruiting video. But one thing to mention here is it helps if you got another spare home game to put in here. I think we got 11 games on the schedule. You can schedule up to 12 for 06. So, for example, if I feel like I don't know if I can beat Syracuse, I don't want to take the chance, or South Florida. There's 3 home games here. If I felt the need to add another home game, like a real patsy game against a 1AA school that I know that I can win, I would maybe want to put that there just for recruiting purposes. Now, I'm not going to stoop that low. I think most players can do a whole lot better than to schedule a team like that. But what I'm just talking about here is you really need to pay attention to where your home games are at towards the end of the season. That way you have some games you feel like you can win that will help you in recruiting when you do have players come to visit. But for this example, I'm just going to leave the schedule as is. Next up, we have redshirt players. Redshirting, all that means is any player that's not been redshirted for before, you can put a red shirt on them and have them set for a season. This kind of affects recruiting. Like, for example, we got quarterbacks right here. We have a redshirt junior, we have a senior, and we have a true freshman. Now, you look at this quarterback, he's probably going to be our starter. He's got 92 overall. Then you got his backup at 76 and a freshman at 74. There's a good chance all 3 of these quarterbacks won't play. And if you notice, this is a perfect example right here. That means this kid has already redshirted. That's why you notice that he is entirely grayed out on the screen. So you can't redshirt him twice. But these other guys, you can. They have not been redshirted yet. For this example, what you can do here is I can redshirt somebody. So you notice here at the bottom, redshirt player. I can just select X, and I want to redshirt this freshman quarterback. Again, I'm guessing he will probably not start. I bring this up because this kind of affects recruiting in a sense, which we will talk about here in a little bit. So you can go through every single one of these positions and redshirt whatever you need to, because this will affect the amount of players coming back next season. We are back on the main menu for Dynasty mode. Now, before we go to our next step, I do want to look at preseason options very briefly. And let's go back to redshirt players. I did show you that I redshirted one guy. I didn't want to bore you with redshirting the rest of them. But you notice here, I went throughout these other positions and I redshirted a bunch of guys who I think are young and who probably won't play a whole lot for me this season. I just wanted you to be aware of that because this will affect recruiting. And I will show you that here in a little bit. Now, the next step that will affect your redshirting will be in rosters. So you go all the way down to rosters, select rosters, and let's start at the very top with view and edit rosters. And all this is just the way you can look at your roster and kind of edit them. You can edit certain things. You can't edit their ratings once you're in Dynasty mode, but I just wanted to point out really quickly, you go down to this freshman quarterback, and look, it does show that we did redshirt him. Next up is depth chart. This is very similar. You go right here, it took out all the redshirted players. So if I wanted to add a Bill Stoll back, I'll have to select like this tight end and go down here. Notice that he is in blue. It shows that he is still redshirted. So again, I just want you to be aware of what that looks like when you have redshirted guys taken out of the depth chart. So let's talk about why redshirting is affecting a lot of different things with recruiting. The next step with recruiting alone is in-season recruiting. So let's go here. Now, there are a lot of things to cover, and let's go through every single one of these aspects on this screen. This is your in-season recruiting screen in terms of selecting players to actually recruit during the season. Let's start off at the very top. You notice this guy right here. This is his profile picture. It is this guy right here as well. You notice that entire horizontal line is red. So when I keep scrolling down, it goes from one guy to the next, and a lot of information at top will change. So let's go back to the very top of this defensive end. This is his position. His name is Jason Little. This is his city and state where he's located. State is very important, which we'll cover here in a minute. This is his height, and this is his weight. Thankfully, the PlayStation 2/Xbox games do have height and weight really affect things, which is a really good thing compared to some of the later ones. His tendency, that's just the type of player he is for his position. I am going to do a video for every single position and how I like to recruit them, depending on the type of defense and offense and such. But I just wanted you to be aware of what tendency is. I think tendency, there's like 3 different ones for each position. It just kind of gives you an idea of what that player kind of is like as a player for that position. Next up at the top right, we got a top 50 red zone player. All that means he's just a top 50 player in the country in Old Spice Red Zone top 50. That's kind of like the sponsor and such. So if you notice down here when I keep scrolling down, it is based off how good the player is. So let's talk about that. Let's go over here to Caliber, and that is the player prestige. He is a 5-star player. Notice you got 5 red stars. And in-season recruiting, it goes from 5, 4, and 3. Now, the game itself, you can recruit 1 star, 2, 3, 4, and 5. But for in-season, it's just 3 through 5. So this list is going to be a very small list compared to what we're going to see in the off-season. So the next thing we're going to look at is scholarships available. This is probably the most important thing on this screen. This shows you how many players you can actually recruit during the regular season. So if you notice here at the very bottom center, we have target prospect. If I select X, it shows that I have targeted that prospect and my number went down. So once you select 12 guys, you're running out of scholarships, and those are the only 12 guys you can go after. Now, in terms of strategy, do I need to go up to 12 and recruit as many as I can? Yes, there is no penalty to going after 12 guys or 10 or 5, 4, whatever. You might as well just get 12 guys that you really like and go from there. So let's talk about a couple other things before we look at some of these actual players. You got a team overview screen and you got the help screen. Now, we've talked about the help screen before. It just shows you some of the options for that particular screen. But let's talk about team overview. You have to hold down the button. You notice here, if I just tap the button, it just goes away. You have to hold down the button to bring up the team overview screen. As you see here at the very top, it shows the name of your team. But the big thing is it shows the number of scholarships you have available. So let's look at every single one of these columns. You start off on the very left. These are your positions. This is the rating. This is the average rating for your current players that are coming back next season. Then you got your freshmen for each position and sophomore, junior, senior. Notice the seniors are in gray. That's because those players are gone. This screen is all about what your roster is going to look like next season, not this season. And then you got the total. So you see this is the number 2. That's because we got a 1 plus another 1 to equal 2. Next column, this is your new prospects. This column right here are the players that you will actually get to commit for that position. As you can tell, it's just a bunch of zeros because we haven't even recruited anybody yet. Next up, this is your target column. This is what we're going to do here shortly, and it's going to, every time you target a player, those numbers are going to increase. And last but not least, this is your needs. Now, do you remember on the coach strategy screen where we talked about offensive type and defensive type? This is where that comes to play. This is where redshirting comes to play, because if you remember, we had a quarterback that redshirted. Now, he's a freshman, so he's going to stay as a freshman. If I didn't redshirt Bill Stoll, this number right here would have been a 1 instead. So I never redshirt seniors, but let's pretend Bill Stoll was a senior, this number would have been a 1. That means he was going to come back next season. So that's what the redshirting comes into play. But now let's talk about the needs. This is where those offensive and defensive types come into play. So you notice this is a number 1. Then you see this number right here. This is the total number we have coming back. If you add those two numbers together, that comes at the 3. For this offense, which we pick balance, we need a minimum of 3 quarterbacks. Now, I'll go ahead and tell you every offensive type has a minimum of 3 quarterbacks. But you look at some of these other ones, again, for balance, 1 plus 1 for a fullback tells me I need at least a minimum of 2 fullbacks. So you notice which numbers I'm pointing at here. You notice quarterback, fullback, center, and defensive tackle. All of those are in orange. Those are your need players. These are your minimum requirements. You have to at least get somebody here. You do not have to do this in season. We could do it in the off season, but you need to be aware of where you are really low at, because if you do not meet that requirement, the game will put walk-ons on your roster and you can't get rid of those guys. So you make sure you get the minimum, and this gives you a rough idea of which positions you may need to look at, especially in in-season recruiting. It's just a nice little visual of which kind of where you start in terms of going after players. So let's keep going, looking down here. We got a few other positions to look at. You notice that kicker and punter and athlete are all grayed out. Those are all grayed out because you cannot recruit these in season. You can only go from quarterback all the way to strong safety. And at the very bottom, these are just totals. This is an average of the rating from up above. The rest of these are just totals. But I always use this screen. This is a very good information that gives you good idea of kind of how you want to go about adding players to your roster via recruiting. So now let's talk about the information for each one of these players. You notice here for Jason Little, we got a few other things to look at. We have his position. As you can see right here, these are all the positions, and you got the 40 time. That's how fast a player is. This will affect the speed rating. Bench press will affect a few other ratings. Again, I'm going to do a separate video on ratings and stats conversions alone. But just to give you an idea of what bench press is just sort of like a strength rating. Same with squat. These are your squat numbers, and this is your field awareness. This is how smart a player is. Now, before we look at any of these players, let's actually look at a couple other ways to sort this massive list of players. If you notice, I'm going to use my little square function, and you notice this bar right here. Notice how small that little red spot is. That means there are just a ton of players on the all list. And what I mean by the all list, it's the entire list is sorted with every position in mind, and it's sorted by every state. So if you go by this right here, L2 and R2, what this is, you can sort by position. Really handy when you know which players or positions you really got to go after out of the gate. And again, it goes from quarterback to strong safety. All states, you can sort by your states, and this is where the states really come into play. You notice up here, this guy is from North Carolina. And when I change these states, I go over to North Carolina, he'll be over there. But what we really need to pay attention to is this right here. Let's select this guy, Daniel Glover. You notice this right here? That says pipeline. A pipeline state is a state where you have a little bit better chance of getting players from that state. You've been recruiting that state very hard over the years, and you get extra. It's less points you have to spend on those types of players and such. And spending player or points on players really affects off season, not in season. But I really want to emphasize the pipeline because each team has several pipeline states. So when I'm at this screen, what I like to do is, and there's no right or wrong way to do it, some people like to start off with positions first and go down the list. What I like to do is go by states first because I always want to go to my pipeline states, look through those lists, and then whatever scholarships I have left over, we can look around elsewhere. So let's look and see which pipelines Pittsburgh has. So let's go through all of these states and let's find some pipelines. Now, when you start a dynasty, all of these are set at default depending on that particular team. And I'm going to do a separate video on pipeline states alone. But you notice here, the state of Florida is a pipeline. Now, Florida is very far away from Pennsylvania, but a lot of teams like to use Florida as a pipeline because you notice how little that red bar is. That means there are a lot of players in the state of Florida, just a ton. So you have a lot more options available. So for me, maybe I want to keep Florida as a pipeline and really try to get a bunch of players out of there. It's still going to cost me a little bit extra in the offseason because it's so far away. But again, that doesn't really affect in-season recruiting. We'll talk about that in the offseason video. But let's look at some other pipelines. So we know we have Florida. It's going to show all 50 states, and we're going to go through every one of them. It looks like Maryland is a pipeline. Now you notice this is a very big red bar that tells me there are not a lot of players coming out of the state of Maryland. For anybody who knows their U.S. geography, Maryland isn't very populated. Yes, Washington, D.C. is there. Baltimore, Maryland is a big city. But in general, for this game, Maryland doesn't produce a lot of talent. But at least you know that for us in particular, out of the gate, starting a dynasty, Pittsburgh has Maryland as a pipeline. So let's keep going. I'm sure we will find a few more pipelines. Here is our next one in New York. New York doesn't have a whole lot of players. As you could tell, they probably have 7 players total. Here's 5, 6, and yeah, just 7 total players. So not a ton of talent comes out of New York, but at least we know that New York is technically a pipeline for us right now. So let's keep going. And here's our next pipeline. We have Ohio. Now, Ohio, notice that little bitty red bar right there. That tells us we have a ton of talent coming out of the state of Ohio. That is as true as it ever has been in today in 2021. Just a ton of players coming out of the Buckeye State. Now, for those of you who do know their geography, Pennsylvania is right beside Ohio. So when you have Ohio as a pipeline and it's really close to your home state, you're not going to have to spend a whole lot of points going after kids out of Ohio. Plus, you got a little bit of leg up because it is actually a pipeline. So that's another one to keep in mind. For me, in this particular case, Ohio would be my number 1 pipeline state because there's so many kids and it's so close. So let's keep going. Here is our own state of Pennsylvania. This will always be a pipeline no matter how many kids you get out of your home state. But thankfully, in our scenario, Pennsylvania produces quite a few players. You notice here the red bar is not very big. There's quite a few in that state. So we'll keep that in mind as well. We'll keep going. There's a couple other scenarios I want to show you that are unique. We are already in the Ys, and here we have Canada. I want to talk about that. Canada, you would think, would be spread out. Canada is a humongous country. But in this game, it is treated just as one state. Now, you also notice there is no little red bar over here. There's no bar at all. That means there are only 5 guys on the list. I mean, there's just not much to come from it. But I just wanted to point out about Canada in general that you actually can recruit there. You can actually treat it as a pipeline if you feel like it. Last but not least is Washington, D.C. It has its own state. The game treats it as a state. So kind of keep that in mind. D.C. is kind of close to Pennsylvania, so if I felt like it, I could turn it to a pipeline, and it won't cost me a whole lot of points in the off season. But I just wanted you to be aware of that. So that is it for all the states. So what I mentioned earlier is I prefer to go by the states first and then sort by the position. So let's go right to our own home state. And if you remember, we need a quarterback, a fullback, a center, and a defensive tackle. Okay, so let's go and see what we got here. Looks like we got 3 quarterbacks out of the state of Pennsylvania. Now, I'm going to run a balanced offense. Now, I can do a little bit of everything with a balanced offense, but you notice this guy's balanced. He's a 4-star kid. He can run a little bit. 4.69's not bad. He seems to be pretty smart, but we do not know a whole lot about him. A quarterback, we don't know if he's got a good enough arm. We will know that once we put him on our list and head into the next week. But for now, let's just pretend we want this kid. So I'm going to target him, and what happened? My number went down to 11. So let's go after a couple other ones. Here are 2 3-star quarterbacks. Let's just go to other positions. Halfback, we really don't need anybody at halfback, but we may come back to it later. Right now, what I normally like to do is just stick to the needs for now. So we can go to fullback. Looks like we have a fullback here. I can go after him. I don't have to. But he's an in-state kid, and let's pretend that this is the type of fullback that I want. So let's go ahead and target him. Next up, we have a center. We can go straight to center. There are no center prospects in the state of Pennsylvania, so we can kind of keep that in the back of our mind next time we go to one of our other pipelines. I think our other position we're going after is defensive tackle, and it looks like we got a pretty talented player. He's a top 50 guy. He's a 4-star. And let's just pretend that I really like what I'm seeing here. Again, I'll cover how I like to recruit these positions later on, but let's just pretend that I like him, and we will target him. And it shows, this is a good example. You notice I recruited a center, or I recruited a defensive tackle, but it still shows that I need 2. I targeted 1. That means 2 plus 2 gives me 4. So if I wanted to, I can target another defensive tackle somewhere, and this will go away to white. It will become white. Same with the center. Once I recruit a center, at least 1, this will go back to white, because if you notice, quarterback went to white and fullback went to white. So just keep that in mind. So let's just keep going. Now, I'm going to stop here because I'm kind of just looking at my needs. I can go back to Pennsylvania here in a minute if I have some extra scholarships to give. So in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, what's my number one true pipeline state? I don't treat Pennsylvania as a pipeline. It is in-state. It is always going to be a pipeline. Let's go to our number one, and in my opinion, it's Ohio. Let's go back to quarterbacks, and let's see if we can find another quarterback here. Now, again, I'm going to cover strategy in terms of how I like to recruit, how many quarterbacks in the preseason, offseason, and such. But for now, we're just going to select and just fill up our target list. Here are a couple of 3-star kids. I'm not really liking what I'm seeing there. Let's just pretend I don't like it. Let's just move on to what's next. Fullback. Okay, here is a top 50 fullback, and here's a 3-star kid. I really like the look of this guy. He's a top 50 guy, 4-star. You got to remember, we're Pittsburgh. I'm a 4-star program. I'm probably going to recruit 4-star and better. Again, that's a separate video all to its own. But this guy's got some speed to him. Let's just pretend that I really like him and let's recruit him. We'll target him. Next, we can go back to center and defensive tackle. Are there any centers in this state? No, there isn't in Ohio. So let's go to defensive tackle. There are a few here. They got 3 4-star guys. Here's a big guy, 305-pounder. He looks to be the strongest of the bunch if you look at his bench and you look at his squat. Then you got 6'1", 280, 6'3", 305. Let's say out of these 3, I like this guy the best. Let's just go after him. Or I may want to go after this guy. Let's just pretend we'll go after this guy instead because I maybe really want some good awareness. How about that? So when I selected him, I targeted him, what happened? Look at the defensive tackle. It went wide. So again, keep that in mind as you target some of these guys. This stuff will change on you. And we can stop here for now because we got 7 scholarships left. I want to look at my other states for needs and such. Now, it shows I've already filled up all my needs except for center. So what we can do is go back to like a couple other pipeline states. New York was one of them. There are no centers in New York, nor there was a defensive tackle. We can go to Maryland. We can go to Maryland. There's no centers, and there's no defensive tackle. So let's pretend we got Florida. We can do Florida as well. I completely forgot. Let's pretend that I want Florida as a pipeline. We can do that. We got a couple defensive tackles here, but I wonder if they have any centers. They got a big 4-star center. We can take a chance on him. He's a pipeline kid. He looks pretty talented. So let's go ahead and target that guy. Now, what you can do is at the beginning of your dynasty, you can start building and creating new pipelines. For example, we are in Pennsylvania. Let's pretend I want West Virginia to be a pipeline. Let's say I have like deep ties to West Virginia as a person in real life, and I just love the state of West Virginia. Now, if you notice, there are only 3 guys in the state of West Virginia in NCAA recruiting, but let's just pretend I really want West Virginia as a pipeline. This is the perfect time just to start recruiting guys from that state. So if I wanted to, here's a cornerback, a wide receiver, 6'5", 207. Here's another corner. Let's pretend we can look at our corners. We got 4 guys there. Let's just go after this corner right here. I like his speed, his awareness. Let's just go after him. So again, this is a perfect time to build pipelines. But you need to build up enough of these guys. You need to get them to commit in order for that to happen. So now where are we? Let's go back to all states. And we are back to all positions. And where are we? Are 5 scholarships left. So let's pretend we got 5 spots left, and here normally is where I like to go after guys that I technically don't need right now, but I would love to have in my program. So what I can do is go back to Pennsylvania. We can go back to Pennsylvania, and I can stay here, and I can just see where our best players are from the state. Like here's a halfback that may look just absolutely incredible. I could go after him. Here's a middle linebacker that looks amazing. He just fits my defense, whatever. We can do that. So we got 3 scholarships left. So maybe I want to go back to Ohio and look at these. They got several 5-star guys. They got 2 of them, a defensive end. Here's another halfback. Well, let's pretend this defensive end looks really special and I would really want him, and we'll go after him. So that gives us 2 spots left. Now, if you felt like it, if you really want to do some pipe, like some real pipe dream type stuff, we can go back to All-State. And we can go here, and these are the best players in the country. Let's say this wide receiver is just like on my mind, or this running back, Rosano. I like the guy's name. He's out of Louisiana. Louisiana produces a lot of talent. Maybe I want that to be a pipeline. You do not have to do a pipe dream type last 2. You can go back to your pipeline states and go after some 3-star guys. But I just wanted you to be aware that you can really build pipelines by doing this, or you can add a couple pipe dream players, and you may look out. These guys may really want to come to your school. But we can keep it, I guess, quote-unquote realistic, and we can go back to Ohio. I'm more concerned about keeping Ohio as a pipeline than anything else. So we can go back here, and maybe I really want to go after another quarterback. I like the looks of this guy. Or I need to pick up somebody else, like maybe an offensive tackle, a guard, what have you. I would prioritize Ohio a ton because this pipeline can go away if you don't recruit well enough. So let's pretend that I really want this guard, or yeah, let's just go after this guard. That's fine. So now you notice we are down to 0 scholarships. That means we are done with the preseason recruiting. So what is next is, once you feel like you have done everything you wanted to look at here, you can now go on to your play week. So you go to play week, and when it comes to scheduling, and I should have mentioned this a little bit earlier, but I always like to leave the first week as a bye. Most teams do. I think there's barely 3 games that are played in week 1, but I prefer to leave this as a bye week so I can go ahead and simulate this so we can go on to week 2 and really start recruiting. So let's simulate week 1. And here we are in week 2. Now, week 2 is where you actually start doing some things with in-season recruiting. So you go back to your main menu, you select in-season recruiting, and here is where you start distributing points. Now, this is going to be the beginning of our next video. This is going to be the start of our quote-unquote in-season video. I can't wait to get started with that. So what we've talked about today is just getting everything set up for your dynasty to get to this point right here so we can actually quote-unquote put some interest and some recruiting points onto some players. We will start there in the next video, so come on back, and I'll talk to you later.